You know, we are living in the days of crises. You read your newspapers, you listen to your radios, you watch your television, and what you hear is one crisis after another. There is corruption in the government, both in ours and in our very nearest relative, our sister country, the United States. But there's so much corruption in government, crises. There's political deception, and there's political unrest all over the world. You know, I just think of General Gaddafi in Libya and other leaders in some of those countries over in the Middle East, and how they are willing to murder their own people who are demonstrating peacefully because they want to be free. It is just a crisis. We have terrorists, young men and women who are willing to blow themselves up and kill others. That's a crisis. They're willing to give their lives because of hatred. They are willing to give their lives. And I think of, you know, we all hear and know the words of Al-Qaeda and how they are spreading this crisis, this terrorism throughout the world. I think now that many of you, anybody who probably is over 10 years old, you know, you can remember, if I just say 9/11, something pops into your mind, into your head. We think of Osama bin Laden and the things that he fostered, the hatred that he helped to build into young people growing up. I think of how the people, when he was located and killed, and people began to celebrate because they were thinking that's the end of someone who is going to produce and young people who have this evil in their thought. But while they were still celebrating, dancing in the streets, another crisis was arising, that crisis in Pakistan. And it, in no small way, affects you and me living right here. But these are crises that we are facing every day. Yes. And then along with those crises that are brought on by men, there's such catastrophic natural and man-created crises in this world. The disasters that have come, the earthquakes. I mean, we have heard of earthquakes all of our lives, and most of us thought, oh, earthquakes, we immediately thought about California. But there have been throughout the world lately so many, and then the earthquakes followed by the tsunamis and thousands of people losing their lives. And you can just let your mind go, the volcanic eruptions, the tornadoes, the hurricanes, all of these things that we have witnessed. And then on top of all these, or along with them, is the economic crisis that we have faced in the last few years. The unemployment, you listen and hear those numbers, and you know that means something to you. These people are out of work. How are they going to feed their families? What are they going to do? It affects us, has affected us all, that financial crisis. And then you look around and you see the homelessness. Yes. People who owned a beautiful home and who now are homeless. Homelessness, a few years ago, meant to us somebody who had dropped out of society maybe, or some sort of psychological problem had caused them to just leave their families and go and live someplace else. But now there is so much homelessness. Mothers living on the street with their children, what a crisis. Living in cars, not knowing where they're going to lay their head and how they're going to feed their family. These are days of crisis. And then the plight of the poor. We see it every day. You know, some of us call ourselves poor, but when you really see the people who are poor, I mean poor, it is just such a dilemma what they are going through. Because a crisis is a critical event or a point of decision which is, if it is not handled in an appropriate and timely manner, or if it is not handled at all, it may turn into a great disaster. I'm sure that many of you, if I ask you today, can think of a personal crisis, maybe in your own family. You could think of it. We are often at a point of crisis in our personal lives when we need to make a decision. And my question to you this morning is, what do you do when you don't know what to do? What do you do when you don't know what to do? The Bible tells us of a time in Israel when there was a great crisis. Many times, but the one I'm going to make you think about today and hope that you will read about when you go home, which is in the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel, starting at the 3rd chapter. Right. And you don't need to get your Bibles because you're going to want to read this when you get home because it crosses over many of the chapters. But it's 1 Samuel, starting at the 3rd chapter, and you'll have to read many. Samuel was a man of God at this point. But he, as a young boy, had been taken by his mother to live in the temple with the priests. So he had been brought up with a godly man, Eli, and lived and had been taught and trained and was educated. He was a judge. He had that education. He became a leader, and he was a remarkably versatile leader. He loved and obeyed God, and that made him great. You know, all the education in the world doesn't make you great as you could be if you love and obey God. Samuel was a judge, and he went on the circuit. He traveled the circuit, judging in all different areas because the 12 tribes of Israel had kind of split up and they were going here and yon and each living and doing their own thing in their own tribe. But he would travel the circuit, meting out judgment. And then he was also a prophet. He talked to God, and so God gave him insights and told him what was going to be. If you stay close enough to God, if you talk to God, He can give you, impart to you knowledge that you know what is going to be. And he was also a priest. As the years passed, he, as the leader of Israel, with these qualities, he had them in a time of peace with their enemies. Things were going well because they had a good leader who led them, and with God's help they had defeated all the enemies and the Philistines around them. They were doing as they asked. But as years went by, Samuel did what we all do. He aged, and he wanted to retire. And of course he had trained his sons, and they were judges. And they, you know, he saw to it that they were educated in the way they should be, and they were judges. So he turned some things over to his sons. But unfortunately, those boys, they were the judge. When he started setting them up in their place, they got kind of up there and they started losing their relationship with God. And they started taking bribes and doing all kinds of things that, you know, young judges could do and get away with it. And then they started perverting justice. And that really got to the people, that now they are doing wrong things and even perverting justice. We can't have this, Samuel. Now, Samuel had been there. He hadn't turned everything over to them. He knew that you keep the reins. So when his sons did this, he just, like, they had to go. They had to leave. That the boys had to get out of there. The elders in Israel, they decided to get together and have a little meeting. They had to have it face to face because there weren't any lines that they could all get on and everybody talk together. They met face to face. And they wanted to make a decision because they knew their leader was getting old. So they said, look, you know, Samuel's getting old, and sometimes he forgets things, and he, you know, misplaces things, and we need a good, strong leader.